have a draft code by the end of this year, in November, December. And we are hopeful that the town board will have the ability to consider revised zoning legislation by June of 2020. This is all contingent with the town moratorium that we currently have issued for the Chappaqua Hamlet for the business districts. So this will help us get past that moratorium, give the community a sense of what we're looking at in regards to development potential in the Chappaqua Hamlet. I'm also going to say real quickly, and I may talk a little bit more about the relationship of this to the town's comprehensive planning process, but I'm going to carry you all back about 3 years ago to 2014, when the town conducted its public outreach process in preparation of preparing the update to the comprehensive plan. At that time, we had extensive community outreach where we spoke with the community at large about what it wanted for Newcastle as a whole. Resounding was the protection of the community's character. Okay, that is kind of the overall umbrella that all of this work will be done in. Protecting the character of Newcastle, protecting the character of the Chappaqua Hamlet. It was identified that people wanted revitalization in the Chappaqua Hamlet. They wanted places to shop, to eat, to go to in today's world of internet shopping. They also wanted places that were different than single-family homes, where their kids who are out of college could come back and live in the community, where they could leave their single-family homes but remain in the community. These are the things that the public had told us. If you look at our comprehensive plan, we have specific goals that characterize what the community had wanted. The effort that we're taking now with the Chappaqua Hamlet revitalization is consistent with the goals, with the actions of the comprehensive plan. And so what we're doing today, and the consultant can speak more readily to this, is all of you are helping create that foundation for the form-based code so that it speaks to what the community wants. It's not something that one person wants. It is something that is community-wide, has support of the community, and is what is needed to revitalize the Chappaqua Hamlet. And you may say, well, why the Chappaqua Hamlet? There are goals in the comprehensive plan for Millwood, for the commercial area in Millwood. I don't want you to think that we're ignoring Millwood. There are specific goals for every area of this community. Today, we're talking about the Chappaqua Hamlet. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Bonnie and Eric. And we're going to go around and introduce everybody so that we can all know who we're talking to. Okay, so if you guys want to start with your introductions.
To introduce myself?
Yes.
My name is Bonnie Von Olson. I'm with Kinley Horn in our office in White Plains. We're going to be doing the planning, and also in the context of the generic EIS, we'll be doing traffic and parking, natural resources, all of the different categories, infrastructure, sewer and water, that we're going to have to evaluate with this new zoning in order to get it through the state quality, environmental quality review process. I have with me today Alexa, say your last name? Sigoriak. This is her third day. She's a planning intern with us this summer, and she's a Master's of Planning candidate at Binghamton. And also Andrea Cannell, who can introduce herself, but she's traffic expertise in our White Plains Kinley Horn office. We'll start with that. Go ahead, Eric.
Hi, I'm Eric Alessia from Cordy Gallison Partners. I'm a partner in the firm. I've been hired to develop a form-based code and everything that entails and that means. We'll talk about that a little bit more. I've developed a number of form-based codes in the past, and so excited to be here working on this one. I think it's a great Hamlet, has a great character, and certainly understand the desire to kind of protect that character. And I think having a train station is a great asset, something that many communities would love to have. And so to sort of trying to leverage that and making sure that we work and find a solution that is really tailored to Chappaqua, right? Because what we don't want to do is just kind of rubber stamp some solution from somewhere else. And so it's really about finding what the right solution is here. And then the second part I think that we're really committed to is implementation. So understanding that you're not just trying to create an ordinance and not just trying to create the vision. You're really trying to make sure that you're working towards implementing something that gets actually built and done. So happy to be here.
Thank you. I'm Joel Russell. I'm an attorney and urban planner. I have my own consulting business out of Massachusetts. And I've done a lot of work with form-based codes over the years. I was executive director of the Form-Based Codes Institute, which is a national organization for a while. And I'm happy to be here. I think there's a real potential to do great things here. My function on the team is to integrate the work everybody else does so that it works with the town of Newcastle's zoning ordinance, and it's all internally consistent and fits with state law and all of that. So that's what I'm doing here.
Patty Adele, Managing Partner of Real Estate Solutions Group. Our focus is going to be on the market and financial feasibility side of what's going on with the form-based code, so we'll be testing that. In addition, we're going to look at the competitive markets around here to try and understand what kind of niche Chappaqua can play and what you're referring to in terms of local retail, events, programming, and in the end, we'll also provide some sort of strategy and recommendation on how to get there.
Hi, as Bonnie mentioned, my name is Andrea Connell. I work with Bonnie and Alexa in the Kimley Horn White Plains office, and I do the transportation and parking. So I'll be assisting with that in terms of the environmental impact statement. And I'm really looking forward to working on this. Sounds like a really exciting project.
Rob Greenstein, Town Supervisor, and Binghamton alumni.
Sabrina, Howard.
Bob Kirkwood, Planning Board, here mostly because it's Sabrina's birthday, that's no reason.
I had to throw that out there to get people here today.
And he thought there's gonna be cake.
Yeah. Very disappointed so far,
We should have breakfast and coffee.
Steve Tavolacci, born and raised here in Chappaqua. Local developer. I own a bunch of property in this town. I'm building a 14-unit, 3-store building mixed use at the top of the hill. So I'm here to help you.
Randy Catchus, 26-year resident, former business owner in town, and still own some commercial property in town.
Bill Spade, I'm an architect, Sasaki Spade Architects. My partner and wife Keiko is there. We've lived here for how many years now? 30? 30 years, so long-time residents too. Very active in town, love the town. Working with Steve on the project up at 91 Bedford Road. We were very happy that that was kind of the first new apartment building, you might call it, multi-use building in town. We got a very favorable reception through the planning board in doing that, and we certainly look forward to that kind of project being a model for, you know, what else can be done in town. And very interested in seeing that kind of further development here.
Tom Curley, Planning Board. I thought that maybe I was the resident who'd been here the longest. You guys had me. I've only been here for 25 years.
Oh, Greg Sanzari, Planning Board, Binghamton, and my birthday's next week, so I expect a song.
Next meeting.
We're not meeting next week.
We're gonna make one.
Get your cake now.
I'm Lisa Katz, the Deputy Town Supervisor. Did not go to Binghamton.
Jeremy Salan, Town Council, 13 years, this is my bar mitzvah here in Newcastle. So I'm more of a rookie than you, Tom.
No.
Ivy Poole, I'm a member of the town board.
Okay.
So, I'm curious, before we even start.
Sorry.
Sorry, Corner, I donated my chair to the boss. Robert Deary, the Comptroller, Deputy Town Administrator for the town.
Money game. And
I'm curious, just from everyone here, if we ask the question, what is the one greatest accomplishment or thing that would be accomplished by doing this effort, what would it be in everybody's mind?
more housing in downtown Chappaqua.
Feet on the street.
Yeah. Feet on the street.
Feet on the street.
Feet on the street is a fair statement.
Building a community center. I think feet on the street while kind of maintaining still the bucolic nature of our community.
process that lets people come in and do things, that doesn't take 10 years.
Simplify.
It's meta.
That's a better way of saying it.
What did you say?
I said simplify.
Yeah,
And maybe
absolutely.
incentivize.
Yeah.
But I mean, if feet on the street is, a lot of what we're suggesting is to get more people in downtown, and if you look at our downtown, forget about the construction. Forget about Chappaqua Crossing opening, you know, feet on the street's been a problem for many years.
I think a diversity of uses, and purposes.
I would add a very livable, walkable, green downtown. I think that's a model for what we need to be doing for communities in our current climate and as the world is going forward. We can prove to be a model for that.
So when you say green, do you mean green as in green and leafy or green as in sustainable?
Sustainable energy efficiency. We've made some good progress with that in a new building that we're doing, that we can incorporate those kinds of concepts into this zoning would be a wonderful outcome.
Leafy's not bad either.
Yeah.
I guess I'd say, and maybe it's sort of a summary of most of the comments, is have a place that you don't just drive through, but you go to.
Yeah.
Right.
Destination, not a corner.
Yeah.
Right.
It's not a corner.
That's a big one.
Love it.
We really have to find a way to set us apart, make a reason why people wanna come here. Bucolic as it is and as nice as it will be downtown, once it's, well, it'll never be done, but once it's temporarily done. I don't mean that in a negative way, I mean, it's like we're always evolving and growing, but what makes us different? And you mentioned a good point about having the train, it's a great asset, so how we can really weave that into this community, as opposed to just the train and then the community, how can we bring it all together?
Yeah, sense of vitality. How do you make the public housing, vital? How do you make that important and livable and valuable? Commercial space, do we need to make it bigger or smaller to fit that retail customer, Do we have antiquated space that's just not gonna work no matter how hard we push against the rope, And then using the assets we have around town to make it a vital community, a vital part of a much bigger, right, retail downtown place, because we get pulled in how many directions between Pleasantville and Chappaqua Crossing and Osling and, yeah, so we've gotta make it vital for what it is.
There's also, let's face the realities, I mean, we got a downtown and, you're doing the project up the hill, but you got this gigantic hill that essentially, separates our sort of two little retail areas. And then down here, where it's nice and flat, it's 50% is being used for municipal purposes. So we all talk about, more retail and driving people here, well, where are we gonna put this? I mean, that's, we have some real problems with, just logistics.
Well, to that end, I think that we shouldn't be afraid to explore, whether it happens or not, reconfiguring. We have a great rec field. I don't want to set up any red flags, but that's a lot of space. Could that be moved somewhere, even on a train station parking lot, and use that as more of an asset to develop in some capacity? Which would be very controversial, but yeah, this
Move potentially
And
and
the parking lot,
utilize in the
communal
parking
parking
lot.
Yeah, which has caused a huge outcry, but let's face it, it's not the most efficient use of space. And I know nobody wants to ruin our charming character, and I guess we could debate whether a 7-acre parking lot is charming or not. Maybe it's 9 acre, or whatever.
So some of those are, I'll say, big ideas, right? Like moving this building. Is that in the realm of reality? Is that
You have to
potential?
just tear it down and build something else.
So you're all gonna disappear.
Yeah. Well, I have disappeared.
I think anything is in the realm of reality, but also the reality is that there'll be pushback no matter what we do. But we might as well explore options so that people can understand what that means.
Yeah,
That's
the
just my
more, the
opinion.
more aspirational we are at the beginning, I think we won't set the bar too low. Let's let the bean counting be later in the conversation. Let's try to keep the ideas as the big ideas, and then as people pick at it, that's when the reality is gonna start to set in on things.
I would agree with that, but this is a pretty big bean to count here.
Oh, yeah, yes, it's a big one.
And there are I imagine that there are complications to the town selling property and demolishing its building and how that gets paid for, so on and so forth. If that really, I would suggest that really needs to be on the table, and I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but maybe there ought to be a little bit of preliminary work on the town's part to sort of look at that and just see the extent to which it might be realistic or not. Maybe you already have. But I would support that. I just think that before we go too far down that road, it'd probably be a good idea to know what that entails.
So managing expectations a little bit here also.
I mean, it being a big reno of this building, not a tear down, a reno addition, but you know, if you gotta start somewhere.
I'd also say that there's a sign on the wall in the boardroom, I think it says 1791, which is when the town was founded. And so it's been here a long time, and I would be interested to be sure that we're not playing the short game here, that we sort of look at the long game. I would suggest that we not jump for a solution which maybe might be in the long term compromising a longer future. There is a problem sometimes when you build at the wrong time, you build too quick, and then 5 years down the road you go, geez, I missed that opportunity, or why did we do that? We could have done it better. So I think there needs to be, sure, let's see what we can do now, but not forget where we want it, where we really need to go.
Any other thoughts? So I thought it might be useful to talk about what a form-based code is. I'm assuming that there are kind of different levels of understanding of the details of it, right? And so I have a presentation, I do a lecture, I'm gonna just jump around. I'm gonna skip a lot of slides. Don't feel like you're being shortchanged. It's just kind of focusing on the kind of bigger picture and what those things are. So let's see if I can. So codes are an interesting thing. We think of them as a kind of a legal document and a bunch of text, right? But in reality, they kind of function as the DNA of cities, right? That's kind of how those sets of rules and standards are kind of what you end up with. There are historic examples of form-based codes. We kind of think about it as something new, but in reality, form-based codes have kind of been around for a while in kind of different ways. I'm not going to touch on all of these, but I'll just talk about that there are physical or philosophical kind of underpinnings to a form-based code. There is a kind of a view of the world, and then talk about like why you do one, what it is, and what the kind of basic elements of that are. So, when you have DNA, right, it's a simple set of instructions. But you get a certain product. Right? Those particular rules result in a certain type of development. They can result in that, or they can result in this kind of development. It just depends on what those particular rules are. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I'll just say, for example, the Law of the Indies, which was written in 1573, was a form-based code. This was the Spaniards coming to the Americas, and they codified how you sort of developed a city. They were kind of doing this from scratch, or tearing down other communities. And it kind of went through and said, this is how you do it. There's a town square.
Is that how Savannah got laid out?
Savannah, not from this one, no.
Okay.
But it actually has a lot of parallels to it. But it goes, I'll go through a few of them. For example, it says, there's a town plaza, right? You should have one of these. It should be in the center. You should have streets that kind of link out to that. You should have a grid network. That's kind of an overlay of the natural features, which they just kind of ignored, just kind of went over top of them. But, and then it said there should be other public spaces that are kind of scattered throughout. And then the pink that you see up there are actually the civic buildings and churches and things like that. Oftentimes they were actually placed on the plazas. So there was a kind of thought about what their place was in society and where they should go. And then this is actually Quito, Ecuador. This is Quito today. And I think what's really interesting about this is that physical form has endured even though the uses in the buildings have changed. So for example, a lot of these were homes and businesses, now a lot of them have become hotels, they've kind of been reconfigured, but the basic framework of the city is the same. Now this code went into a great level of detail, even to the point of, let's see, is this the laser? Oh, it doesn't work with that. So even to the point of there's a colonnade on the edge of the buildings that was called out and said, this space should have a colonnade so that people can stay out of the sun, out of the rain, for the shops there. And so it was a great level of detail. What's interesting here is that the facades of the buildings, the original ones were just simply white stucco with punched hole openings. And then over time, they kind of went back and, you know, depending on what the style was that was coming from Europe at that time, they'd redo the facades. And so, again, it's the basic framework of the city stayed the same. So, I'm not going to talk too much about that. I'll just get into why form-based codes, right? A form-based code talks about form. Form is the first word. So why is form so important? Is it really just an aesthetic thing? Or are we really just looking for a better looking place? So what I would say to that is no. I'd say when we look at, in the United States, by 2030, chronic diseases will cause 52 million deaths per year. So 1 in 3 adults is obese, 74% don't get enough physical activity, and these things lead to obesity, hypertension, diabetes, colon cancer, osteoarthritis, osteoporosis, coronary heart disease. So why are we talking about this? Right? So the reason we're talking about this is because when we look at what makes us healthy, it's 10% is clinical care, meaning going to the hospital, going to the doctor. 20% is genetics. And 20%, oh, you have one that works on the screen. I need one of those. I know. 20% is due to the environment and 50% is healthy behaviors. So what does this mean? It means that 70% of our health is under our own control. So what does that have to do with a form-based code? Well, the actual physical form and design of a community can promote behaviors that lead to better health consequences. So in Atlantic Station, Atlanta, Georgia, people that moved here, you saw 46 to 54% increase in walking for recreation and 44 to 84% increase in walking for transportation. And that's simply based on the physical design of the community. So why is that important? Well, one of the reasons that that's important is because one of the best things that you can do to sort of stave off all those things that we talked about before, the chronic diseases, is simply being more active and simply walking more. I mean, just simply. There are a lot of other things. It's like access to healthy food and groceries, but in reality, just being physically active, just walking more every day has a significant impact. So, have you ever heard the saying, sitting is the new smoking? No. Sitting is the new smoking. I don't have it in this presentation, but I actually usually have a slide that has, there's a person sitting on a couch and he has a potato costume on. So he's the couch potato, right?
You're full of joy this morning. Tell me about chronic disease. Anything else you want to tell me?
Yeah, happy birthday, Sabrina.
So feeling real good now.
So let's talk about environmental sustainability, right? When we look at environmental sustainability, this is by Peter Calthorpe, who's done a lot of research here. But when you look at a typical suburban development, right, and this is, I always forget what these are. These are million British thermal units of transportation carbon. So when you look at a suburban development based on transportation, 237 million British thermal units are produced and 162 million based on buildings. When you look at an urban condition or a compact condition, urban doesn't necessarily mean Manhattan, right? Urban can simply mean more compact, walkable, but lower density. But you see that there's 71 million British thermal units. So the difference between a suburban kind of development and an urban development is significant. And that's just because less transportation carbon is used. So when we talk then about, Yes, property tax revenue by acre. So from an economic standpoint, places that are walkable generate 12 times more property tax revenue per acre, and 6 times more in a walkable neighborhood. This means, in essence, not having retail, right? But in the kind of mixed-use version, 12 times more. So from a health perspective, from an environmental perspective, from a financial fiscal perspective, these kinds of communities are much more beneficial. So that's why form matters. So when we talk about a form-based code, I'm not going to get into that detail. It's important. And so when you look at conventional kind of suburban retail, you would say, if somebody came to you and said, I want to build this next to your house, you know, you might sort of stand back and say, well, I'm not sure that's something I want next to my house. Versus if somebody came and said, well, we want to build this next to your house, you would say, well, oh, that might be a good idea. By the way, this is Palmer Square in Princeton, New Jersey. What's interesting about this is that when you look at these buildings, right, you'd say, oh, that's something that was built over time. It actually wasn't. It was actually, I'm trying to remember what the year was. This was 1920 something, I think, it was built. It was built by a builder, by a developer, all at once. And so what happens here is that these buildings, there's actually parking behind them. Later they came back and they added a garage that actually sits behind these buildings to accommodate the greater number of cars. And further down here, there's a new residential building. This is the post office, and then this is the town green. And so I think it's a great model that sort of shows just because you're going to come in as a developer with a bigger scale doesn't mean that you can't create something bucolic, as the term that's been used here. So I'm gonna kind of skip over all of these. But what I will say is that a well-crafted form-based code is the most effective and predictable, right? You know what you're gonna get. When you have kind of a conventional zoning ordinance that's really based on minimums of like, you've gotta be at least 10 feet back, but you could be 120 feet back from the street. You don't really know what you're gonna get. It's really up to each individual. What a form-based code does is places physical form requirements so that you kind of know what you're gonna get. I'm gonna skip that. But there are some key concepts. So there's the concept of the transect and the concept of the regulating plan. So the transect, if we look at the bottom, says T1, T2, T3, T4, T5, T6, T7, right? But what it really means is you're referring to things by character. So when you talk about T1, you're talking about the natural zone. These are like national parks. We all kind of know what that is. When you talk about the rural zone, you look at this picture and how do you know that it's rural? Right? You look at this and you say, well, the buildings are set back. The roads have no curb, they have grass swales. They're cows, right? So, but there are all these kind of cues that tell you where you are from a physical perspective. When you're suburban, not suburban, but just not quite urban, this may have, for example, no sidewalks. The houses are set further back, and that tells you kind of where you are. T4 is kind of general urban. This is what most people think of when you think of like the quintessential American historic town, is really a T4. And so what happens here is that you start to get sidewalks, you get a green planting strip with street trees, the buildings are closer up, you get porches, you get kind of a mix of heights, and that all kind of tells you where you are. T5 is the urban, it just gets more dense, you no longer have that green strip, it's really about trees and tree pits, wider sidewalks, the buildings are closer up. T6, this is like Manhattan. And then you do have special districts, which are things like university campuses or oil refineries. But it's really character-based, right? You sort of start and say, what's the character? What's the vision of this particular space that we're trying to create, and then create a set of standards that fit in with that. So I'm going to skip forward a lot here, but this is a code. This is in Wyandanch, New York. This is the transect diagram. But along with that transect diagram comes this, and that's the regulating plan. So a regulating plan is different than a zoning code where it's just words. A form-based code actually has a plan associated with it. which is a framework. And so what that framework is, in this particular scenario, for example, locates the streets. Straight path, which is an existing street, Long Island Avenue, this is an existing street, this one's existing, but this one's new, this one's new, this one's new, these are new. That's existing, existing, existing.
Can I ask you a question about the
Yeah.
transect? Is that always the same 7 levels whenever
No.
you create a transect? And how does it relate to commercial or retail space versus residential?
Great question. So when you look at, let's say T4, this is kind of a basic structure. It's modified. So for example, you may have T4A or T4B that gives you a little bit more specificity in terms of what's there. But your question was about use, right? And so that's the one thing about a form-based code. A form-based code can specify use, but it just does that judiciously. Meaning it's usually like in T4, you can have retail, right? So it's just much more flexible in terms of use. It's more about the physical form. In other words, if all the buildings here are 4 stories and they're all lined up, you know, does it really matter if it's a 4-story townhouse or if it's a 4-story multifamily building?
Thanks, that's helpful.
Yeah. So with the regulating plan, what this means with the regulating plan is that you have to start with the physical vision of what that is. So I'm gonna skip forward. Oh, I think I will talk about this one. So, parking. Not the sexiest subject, but so important in what we do. So, how would you like to be the guy that lives right here, or gal, right, that looks at this every day? So, it's easy to come back and say, gosh, parking's ugly, it should just all be underground, right? That's difficult though, and the reason is because of money, right? So just, this is order of magnitude, it doesn't mean it's necessarily what the prices are here, but a surface parking space is about $3,000 a space. So at 500 spaces, it'll cost you $1.5 million to build that parking. If you do an above grade precast concrete structure, let's call that $20,000 a space. At 500 spaces, that's $10 million. So huge differences in cost, right? And then if you go underground, call it 35, it's probably more like 40 here.
Yeah. And then add rock, water, union.
Yeah, exactly, 40, 45, right? But you're at $17.5 million, right? So the order of magnitude for all of this is significant. And so when we come into a place and we create a form-based code, it's important to understand, A, the economics of that, but also what the impact is of that, right? Because if you go with all surface parking, let's take in Chappaqua, right? How much additional development could you get if it stayed all surface parking? Probably not a whole lot, right? And so you have to kind of look at what the strategies are to get there with the parking and how you deal with that.
Just interject for a quick second, I don't wanna, you know, we have this gigantic parking lot, like the commuter lot, which is, 7 acres.
Yep.
And, we're probably not gonna ever do a structured parking lot because of the cost, I mean, we may, but whatever, I'm just trying to keep it real. The truth is also, that parking lot is essentially empty on the weekends, and when you talk about walking, and this is when I thought of it, it's funny, people come from the city and you can walk, you wouldn't even think of jumping in a cab for 15 blocks or something, right? What's your threshold, maybe 30 blocks or something? Here, God forbid, somebody parks in a train station and has to walk to Starbucks, where it's like literally maybe 4 blocks or something. So, there might be a benefit at some point, like we have plenty of parking on the weekends. The key is getting people to actually use it and be willing to walk and maybe tie it all together. Like we have a farmer's market on the weekend, but then, the question is if people go to the farmer's market and then go to downtown Chappaqua. I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but when you talk about walking and parking, you have this gigantic parking lot, but just nobody wants to walk.
Yeah, so I'd say 2 things to that. One is that it's, people are typically willing to walk 5 minutes easily. They'll walk 10 minutes to transit, but only if it's a nice walk.
Right.
In other words, if you're just walking through parking lots.
And a safe walk.
And a safe walk, right. If you're just walking through parking lots or highways, nobody's gonna do that walk, as opposed to.
Nicer or whatever.
Exactly.
Right.
And typically if you have uses that line that, right, then people will walk that.
So we gotta figure that out, because
Right.
we have the gigantic parking lot,
Right.
and it's underutilized on the weekends.
Yeah.
So, if I, just on top of that, I think focusing on the construction cost is missing a big part of the picture, which is what are the other costs to that, function, right? Yeah, it might cost $10 million to build a structured parking lot, but, if we build it on grade, what have we lost having not done the alternative? And the $10 million might be a very efficient cost for the benefit that's created from that. So to focus on just the construction cost of that particular thing, misses the opportunity, or considering opportunity costs for, what other solutions
I mean, I
could
think
be.
the analysis is it $3,000 per space to create surface parking? I think what we really need to look at is what's the value in the market
Correct.
of each individual
Right.
space, and compare that
Right,
against the
right,
cost.
right.
The land value.
Right.
Right.
So
And by the way, I mention that because 5 years ago, I suggested to a prior planning board chairperson that we ought to be considering structured parking at the train station parking lot, and was immediately shot down because, that's gonna be too expensive. To build that is gonna be too expensive. Well, so I react to seeing, immediately just talking about construction costs when, not considering all the other opportunity costs, misses a big part of the picture at least, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And at our first workshop, that's actually gonna be one of the goals, is to actually kind of illustrate what the trade-offs are and finding that balance point, right? Because there's significant benefits to it, and then there's a point at which it just becomes unfeasible, right? But on the other hand, if you were to basically just say all the parking lots stay where they are today, then there probably really isn't a whole lot of development that happens. So trying to find the right balance is key there.
How do you pay for the parking?
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
I know paying for parking is an evil word
Yeah.
around here, but we had done a study for White Plains, and there are strategies and there are ways to finance it, so if everybody's open to it, I think we should
Right.
consider all that.
Yeah.
Well, at a certain density, you can get the developer to pay for the parking.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I
But
think,
that's the big question, the density question and height and bulk and all that is,
Yeah, but we have to
maybe the
consider
threshold
it 'cause-
question on that subject.
Yeah, no, we have to consider it, cause that's our largest area that we can really use to develop.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna talk too much about share parking. But here we go. I'm gonna skip around. So this is a project, this is in Claremont, Delaware. I'm using it just because I have the graphics for it. So we did a charrette. This was the plan that was developed. So what the plan did was it located the streets, wrong one. So it located the streets, it located the green space. It had an illustration of what the building types were. Did we really know what they were? We didn't really know what they were. But what we did know was that this could probably only support surface parking. This could maybe do structured parking, maybe not. And so it was in essence developing a physical plan and a framework. So from there, this was that physical framework that was codified, that was in the code. This is what the regulating plan pulled out. It in essence located the streets and it located the green spaces. So then from there, if we look at a particular block, what the form-based code is primarily interested in is, in addition to that framework, what happens at this that we call the build-to line, which is where buildings get built. And so there are a set of standards that talk about what's the building height, what's the kind of building increment as you go this way. It's the idea that parking has to be located to the internal part of the block behind the buildings. But, this is a sample of what the buildings could be, but it doesn't have to be. So for example, this could be one larger building, or it could be townhouses. Again, it didn't really matter, it's just, do you make that framework and the streets there?
Did it establish the use or just the box?
So it had some limitations on the use, but it was broad. So one of the things that typically happens in the zoning code is there's like, I don't know, 80 different uses that you go through very specific. One of the things a form-based code does is try to really simplify that. It's like, let's take that down to like 10 uses. So when somebody comes in the door, when you talk about making development easier, right, it's, well, that specific use wasn't specified here. Well, sometimes that doesn't even exist in the zoning code. And so you then have to figure that out. So it tries to just simplify it, make it easier for somebody to come and say, I want to build this, it meets the code, I don't have to get any kind of special exception or.
So the use categories are more general,
Yeah.
so it's easier to fit what you want to do into one.
And I think that's one of the major kind of ways of thinking, that everyone, especially you that are so involved in daily planning boards and codes, that it's gonna be a different way of thinking. So if a new use that doesn't even exist, like the Amazon store where you walk in and it scans your wallet while you're walking in, you take your stuff and leave, I mean, that's not listed in any codes around here. Or a doggy spa, which might be, maybe you have veterinary use and you have beauty shop, but you don't have doggy spa, you know what I mean? So by being more general, I think that allows a lot more flexibility for future things that we don't even know exist yet.
But you can't even get into a more detailed kind of level, right? An urban design level, meaning it talks about things like at the end of this access where you drive down, there's a building and that building should be designed to sort of receive that access. So there's a corner tower at this particular corner that sits at the head of the neighborhood green. These are kind of general kind of requirements without specifying what the design of that is. So then again, here's that kind of plan. What's in the next photo? No. So again, based on that code, you could develop something like this. So what's interesting about this project is that this was actually done before the recession. The recession hit. Economics changed. This plan is now probably about 90% built.
May I interrupt,
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt, then. Is this a clean slate that just went up? Because that's
This
a
one
very
is.
different scenario
Yeah.
than we have here.
Right.
There's so many different property owners,
Right.
you know, so it looks great, but is that something that's really feasible here?
Yeah, so what I'm really doing here is just is illustrating the principles of the form-based code. So for example, in Wyandanch, there were areas that were kind of clean slate that were tear down, and there are areas which they're basically existing buildings. And they're gonna stay, right, for who knows how long, 50 years. So the form-based code needs to sort of address both of those things, the new kind of development and then the existing development.
And that's one of the first things we'll do, is we'll look at Chappaqua specifically, and like just looking at that aerial photo, you know, the school stays, the train station's not gonna move, the bridge, you know, there's certain fixed, the historic buildings,
Right.
all of that.
This is gonna
Certain
be-
things are gonna be fixed, and certain things that we'll talk about how flexible and willing everyone
gonna
is
be-
to, you know, the field, the parking lots, the town hall, even how flexible we can be with
This is gonna
things.
be one of your tight weave situations.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it'll end up being a combo, right? Over in this area, you know, this street's gonna stay there, these buildings are gonna stay there. You know,
Right.
maybe they'll redevelop at some point, but that's kind of the form. Whereas over here, these are areas where there's gonna be a lot more flexibility.
Right.
Well, and it may be we shouldn't restrict ourselves either. It may be if we, even though those buildings are privately owned, if we create a new, you know, code where we allow different things there, the owner of that building may decide to take advantage of that, and we could talk to them about potentially doing that as well. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're not gonna change.
Right, they may find more value in their property once the code lets them do more things with it.
Right, but what probably isn't gonna change is that this road location is gonna change.
No,
I
right.
don't think the road's moving.
Nor is
We spent a lot of money to fix it, so it's.
I know, yeah.
I think everybody got a lot of trouble if they propose moving the road.
Didn't I hear in the news yesterday, there's no do-overs?
So,
But
there's
it's
one.
not inconceivable that you could have some new roads if we do something with the parking area.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
Right,
Right.
yes, new roads, yeah.
Yeah, there are some plans about
Yep.
that you may already know about and find interesting.
No.
About that parking lot back there.
No, I'd love to see them, yeah.
later.
Yeah. So,
We'll roll out a ton of them.
Yeah,
yeah, one last thing.
you just need to stamp the drawing.
And it's done. The last thing I'll talk about is architecture. So a plan is great, right? You can have a pretty good community, but if you have terrible architecture, it's not gonna be great. It might be okay, but it's not gonna be great. And so one of the things that we talk about is the architecture code, and that's a kind of a complicated issue. It's sort of like how much to regulate, how much not to regulate, trying to find that balance. In all of the form-based code, that's a kind of thing you're trying to figure out. There are examples of codes. There's one in Arlington, an early one that was done. It's not a good code. It's just way too specific, right? So you have to balance getting enough specificity to deliver the vision, but not so restrictive that it makes it difficult to administer. So with the architecture, there are different ways you can do that. If you're doing traditional architecture, it's actually not so hard to regulate. Because there's a lot of codification in books and things like that. And so really it's about creating a set of standards. If you allow, I don't have that in here. So this is called a pattern book. Exists outside of a code, but there are some elements. If you're gonna allow contemporary architecture, it's way harder to regulate the character and quality of that. So really what we have done when we've done it is a set of principles. It's really just a kind of set of guiding principles. It's really also classically based, even though it's contemporary architecture. But it's just harder to review that kind of stuff for quality.
This doesn't feel like a contemporary architecture.
It doesn't to
town.
me, no.
But you wouldn't wanna preclude somebody from doing a signature building on a lot or something like that, you know? Well, this is where we're getting into the weeds, so. I think if somebody wanted to come in and do a beautiful glass box someplace, we shouldn't say no because everything's gotta be gingerbread. So I think let's keep the lines open.
Greg's an architect, I think he has a client.
Well, but that is that's the conundrum, right? Because oftentimes when you're
I'm not thinking of Chuck's thing.
when you talk about like when you're talking about in many places a builder price point, trying to do contemporary architecture is really hard because the detailing is so important and the materials are so important, the windows are so important, and yet at that price point you might not be able to get the things that you need to make it really good. And so that's just, we'll get into that, we'll talk about
As a
that.
perfect example, White Plains has the 4 and 5 over the podiums going up everywhere, and everybody is kind of just rubber stamping that same modern architecture with different planes popping in and out in different colors, and it's just everywhere now. And that I would love to regulate.
Well,
But that's
the interesting thing, some buildings are built, right, and you look at it and you say, it's starting to look dated, and it's only been a year.
Yes, that's what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Eric, as a part of this process, will we talk about ways to incentivize current building owners to upgrade their, to make improvements to existing buildings, to bring them into sort of line with whatever our architectural design standards are that we come up with through this?
Yes, it's a little more challenging to do that, but yes. So typically, for example, they're an existing, let's say they're an existing non-conforming use. So it's typically the same kind of standards, right? If you're gonna come in and you're gonna do 50% of something, you've gotta now meet the new standards. But if they're not, if they're just gonna continue to operate, then it's hard for the zoning itself to incentivize them as opposed to having other kind of facade improvement programs, let's say, that incentivize them.
Right, okay.
I'm not gonna talk about administration, and I'm not gonna talk about this one either.
I was gonna say, by the way, we've been to a couple of communities around Washington DC, Potomac, Maryland, where they've done similar things, I think, to the model you just showed, which was that Delaware, you said?
That one was in Delaware.
Delaware, right, and there are these beautiful, historically styled, but new developments, townhouse, they model them after Brooklyn, townhouses, right? And there's just very beautiful communities they've created on that same model, so that we could throw some images of that up at some point as well, to,
Yep.
just to see how that comes out, right?
So the other side of that is being careful to not, you were saying, detail materials, the construction and the architecture to the point where the market won't support building it.
Yeah.
So it's a.
I don't know, I would, as an architect, for this community, right, maybe I'm the longest here, but I see retaining the character of the town as a very important thing, and would like to see the guidelines reinforce that historic character. And I would hate to see it become Pleasantville, which is gonna be, has no regulation about character, and so they're getting a very odd mix and ugly buildings that are getting built there as a result, so.
Yeah, that Main Street has been getting ugly for a long time.
Yeah, right.
And you're right about that.
Right.
That eventually impacts who's gonna wanna come here, you wanna have people
Right.
come here to shop, to be entertained, to.
Right.
That impacts
Right.
attracting anyone, there's
This
no
is-
longer anything unique.
This is a subject that could get quickly esoteric if we let
Right,
it.
yeah.
But just to make the point that really there is architecture that, as you suggest, can be at a price point, but that is its own attraction. And there are, that's not in the family of the pattern book for this kind of, the typical pattern book for Georgian architecture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That's something new and different. And that can have an attraction value, and it can be put in a place which maybe doesn't detract from the other. So I wouldn't necessarily say that you want to just draw a line and say there's nothing but that pattern book. I think that the guidelines need to find some way to allow something special.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that, right?
Yep.
About like what is the appropriate kind of architecture that should be here in Chappaqua. And I'll say, addressing another comment that someone made, we're also architects, right? And we work for developers, and so we're of the belief that you can do good architecture at any price point, right? When you look at some of the great historic architecture, sure, there's high style that's more expensive, right? There's also a vernacular that's more modest and it's still good. And so I think it's actually less about money and more about just quality of design.
Yeah, that's hard to find. Yeah, that's why pattern books are safer.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that's a good lead in to our next topic, which is really about process and schedule. Do we want to talk about that?
We don't have a slide with the schedule, right?
No. Not the new one.
I wrote a couple of these for when we walk around, a couple maps. I don't know how detailed we want to go into this. I have about 7 copies of this.
We can share it probably.
Schedule, we can just share if you want. The overall framework here, we have about 13 months. Hopefully we can compress it to 12. In general, the first 2 months here in May and June before the summer break, people start not being as around, is going to be these intensive sessions, meeting with your group, meeting with, having Eric's 2 workshops, which you can go into in a little more detail, with the goal of having a draft in September, which then will start the secret process, and in the fall and into the winter, where the environmental review is taking place. So I'm more involved in the second half, and Eric's more involved, and Patty especially in the first half. And Joel's watching us throughout, make sure we're doing all the right thing, and that all gets integrated into the existing code. And as we discussed when we were having our interviews and in talking with Sabrina, the goal here really is to replace completely what's in your, take away your business zones. They don't exist anymore, and as we said, it'll be a form-based code with uses much more generalized to allow flexibility, and also with Patty's input for the market research and the current trends of what's going on, and Eric's input on placemaking, and even that thought of, as I was looking at his description with the center plaza or central village green, this Chappaqua now is much more linear. Although, right where that park is and where this town hall is, and with the train station, you could definitely, I know you've added a gazebo, it's almost like that wants to be, I don't know, I'm getting ahead of myself. But, I don't know if you wanna go into the workshops and how that's gonna
Yeah.
progress, and leading to the drafts of the code.
Yeah, so for the code, really we're looking at the first meeting, when was that?
I think it's gonna be June 10th.
June 10th? Yeah, so we have June 10th, which is very soon. We have a lot of work to do before that. So when we look at that, the focus of that is really going to be on kind of a summary of kind of the analysis of what we see, making sure that we're not missing anything. The second thing that we're gonna talk about there is frameworks. It's not really gonna be about a detailed plan, it's more gonna be like options. Like, here's one option, here's a second option, and here's a third option for different frameworks. This is where green could go, or it could go over here, or it could go here. The parking, let's say, what if you didn't do any structured parking, what would you get, program-wise, development-wise? If you did one structure of some type, what would you get? If you did more, what would you get? So it's really gonna be kind of establishing the parameters and the framework, and sort of just illustrating that in a very simple way, so that we can start to have a conversation about that. We'll have photographs of the precedents for architecture from this area, from the kind of Hudson River Valley area, and we'll talk about kind of what is and what isn't appropriate and try to kind of hone that down some. And so that's kind of what the goal of that meeting will be. And then the second workshop will be one where, I'm trying to remember, that's the one where we also have a public meeting. So when we do that, that's where we'll actually have an illustrative plan. So when we saw that one in Delaware, right, there was an illustrative plan that had buildings on it. It'll be a plan like that. And so it'll try to sort of say, we listened in meeting number 1, this is what we heard, this is what the direction is, now we've drawn a plan. And that's so important because that's where the regulating plan comes from. So everybody sort of needs to buy into that plan so that we can then start to develop the regulating plan and the standards.
Does that plan respect private property owners, or is it kind of just more of doing a clean slate in the downtown, setting up zones?
Yeah, so it'll need to respect property owners.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Because one of the things you have to worry about is a taking, right? Which is basically a situation where you come in and you say, gosh, it'd be really great to have a town green right on top of these 3 people's property. Well, the moment that you put that into a legal document, you've basically taken away their ability to develop and function with their property, right? So that would be a taking. So we have to think about that kind of stuff as we develop this.
Can we say, as far as Armonk Square, as far as the architecture, do we like that feel? So we can have them look at that, Armonk Square, right in Armonk? Does everybody like that feel, or?
I don't like that feel.
You don't like that?
I think it looks like Disneyland, like
Okay.
it's very, I think it looks cheap frankly, and it looks very like
Is that
contrived, yes,
Doesn't
that's
look
the right
wrong.
word, it looks contrived.
Very vibrant.
Street from it, yeah,
It's vibrant, I'm not saying it's not vibrant, I'm
Right.
talking about in terms of architecture and how it looks.
Okay.
I don't like the look of it, but yes, it is vibrant, but I think that's a result, not so much of the architecture too, but the fact that they have restaurants, they have a lot going on there.
Big square footage,
I personally like Armonk Square, and to be honest with you, Chappaqua Crossing, you know, I've heard some Disney comments about Chappaqua Crossing, few and far between, but most of the people I speak to think it's incredible, it looks great. But you know, so you know, people, some things look like Disney because Disney has copied, you know, what.
Some things look
It's
that,
true.
some things look that way because they're brand new also.
Right.
It takes a
Good point.
while for things to age, and then they become a little bit, I
Yeah.
think, more familiar part of
I
it.
don't know Armonk Square, and we'll look at that. I'm gonna guess, if I just picture it in my head, right? It probably tries to look like multiple buildings, right? Is that true?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I would say is that there are good ways to do that and not as good ways to do that, right? And there's subtle things that you can codify. So for example, a lot of times you'll get like 3 facades that are trying to look like different buildings, but the cornice height is exactly the same on all of them. So it's a subtle thing to say, well, the cornices shouldn't line up. And just by doing that, it makes a difference. The second is, that the retail base, for example, it all is the same across all three. But if you actually varied that to go with the architecture that's above it, then it would look more authentic, right? And so I think the concept and the principle we use all the time. I think it's a reasonable, it's a good concept. But there are details to it that make it better but
Right.
yeah.
That's an example of when, you're trying to get consensus from the group, and that's part of what our job is gonna be in these first couple of months, is talking to you, and then the public meetings, also talking about placemaking and presenting all these options, and Eric's gonna present some precedents, other examples, and we'll get reactions on what you feel applies to Chappaqua.
Yeah. So then at the second workshop, it's going to be a working session with the group here, but then there's also a public meeting. So that's the opportunity for the public to sort of look at it and say, this is where we are, what does everybody think? And then from there, do we have a third one after that?
Well, no, then we'll come back and present the
Yeah.
code after the summer.
Right.
Present the first draft.
Yeah, and at the second workshop, we'll also present in very generic terms some of the things that we're talking about for the code. So we'll talk about things like build 2 lines. We'll talk about the building height. We'll talk about how we think we should approach the uses. But in general terms, it's not going to be in like a code format. It's really just going to be kind of simple principles. So it'll be important to then agree on all those principles before we sort of get into drafting the actual technical language of the code.
And Eric, when you said we have to respect current property owners, which I agree we do, but that doesn't mean necessarily limiting ourselves to current uses.
Right.
So, if something now is retail and we think that there's a possibility that would be great to add additional residential there, we're not mandating it be changed, but we could say this can include also residential or whatever, so that if they wanna develop it or eventually sell it and it gets changed, then those changes can be made.
Yeah, absolutely. The only time you have to worry about it is if you're downzoning somebody, right? Like if you're upzoning somebody and saying, not only can you do what you're doing now, you can do more, you're adding value to their property.
Right,
Instantly adding value.
But if you come back and you say, well, you have retail and it can only be residential.
Right,
That's a
okay.
problem. Yeah.
So can I drill down on these two workshops for a second?
Yep.
You said public meeting also. Can you explain the relationship with the workshop and the public meeting? Is the workshop to us, this group, and the public invited at the same time? Or, because I don't see public meetings,
I
the
think
public meeting you talked about, I don't see.
We
on-
talked
It
about
happens
this in
later
quite a
in the
bit of
day.
detail. The June 10th and July meetings, the workshops will be with this group. And then the second, but they're open, and then the second one, we're actually gonna hold a second public meeting, one in the afternoon and one in the evening that same day.
Okay, that's
So
not on the
that,
schedule, okay.
yeah, it doesn't break it out that way, but that's what we've
Okay.
talked about with Sabrina, cause she felt,
Do we have a date for
especially
that?
even, we're only gonna have one meeting.
17th,
Yeah,
right?
17th of July.
Yeah, it's like 8 AM to 8 PM.
We should,
Yeah,
Sabrina,
it's a
we
doozy.
should get that out publicly so that if, but like
About
in a newsletter so that if people can plan, cause it's July also, but either the daytime meeting for people who maybe aren't working and the evening meeting for people who are, to make sure that they can at least get it on their calendars so that they know it's there rather than it sneaking up or them not knowing it happened.
And then obviously there will be public meetings through the approval process and the impact statement process.
Yeah, but that,
But at that point, you're working on your proposal that
Right.
you've already formulated. So for public input earlier on, it's gonna be these other meetings in June and July.
so, the schedule has a workshop two, from workshop two to first draft, it's, looks like it's 10 weeks. Is that about right?
Yeah, 2.5 months.
Right, so it's 10 weeks. So the last time that this group meets with you before you come out with the first draft is the same day when we give you input on, let's just call it your plan, whatever that turns out to be. And then later in the day, public comment on the plan. Where's the opportunity for this group then to cycle back with you about our representations of the plan and the public's input and give you maybe further direction? Because it seems to me you might need that.
Yeah.
So there's like
Yeah.
10 weeks where you guys go away and all of a sudden you come back and.
Well, what I would say is that within the beginning part of those 10 weeks is the opportunity to then have the conversation. Because one of the first things we're gonna need to do right after that meeting is we're gonna need to huddle up and get together and talk about, I'm not sure what that format is yet, but we're gonna need to huddle up and talk about and say, these people thought this, these people thought this,
Okay,
we gotta.
I completely agree, I didn't see any of that in
Yeah.
the schedule, so if we could drill down later on and.
Yeah,
But is the schedule proposal, the first time we see your illustrative plan, later that day, the public sees the illustrative plan?
Yeah.
I would think we
Yeah.
would wanna meet on the illustrative plan, you get feedback from us, you go back and you adjust, and then the public sees it.
Absolutely.
You gotta give us a chance to
Absolutely.
give you data so maybe we have a preliminary plan, you don't bake it all the way, it's half baked and maybe we could see somewhere in the middle, and then at that workshop day, you go fully public. I'd just be concerned that you guys could have something in there that we all know is a touchy nerve, and you don't have enough chance to tweak it to show the public in the afternoon, and then people are going just ballistic. And then we've got people on email and the internet, and it takes off.
Yeah, so I would say two things to that. Number one is I think that there are ways to kind of mitigate that. So for example, if we heard in the workshop in the daytime that this was an issue, right?
Okay.
Then in the public meeting, we would say that. We've heard that we think this is an issue about this. What do you think about that, right? That's one. The second is some of this is driven by the overall schedule of really trying to get this thing done because of the moratorium.
Well, I understand that, but we need to be sure we're getting it, if we end up with turmoil in the process, I promise you it's gonna take longer than is on the schedule, I'm guessing that, because, I mean, I've done this too. So, and the other principle, or I'd like to suggest is, this may seem a little harsh, but we are your client, and the public is our client. And so we need to be sure that what is represented by you also represents us before you take it to the public, because they get to you through us. So I think if there's a way to find another step in here, so that we're not all gonna agree on what you bring to us, but at least we'll have a way in which we can influence that and feel better about what we know is coming, and we may be better to represent the public than if you hadn't done that. I think that's important. I don't know how you solve it in the
But you're not
scope.
suggesting that they need to have direct interaction with the public as well.
I'm not
It's
saying
not
that.
all
That's
coming
That's
through.
not what I'm saying,
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
what I'm saying.
I'm saying that they need to have direct interaction with us before they take the product of that plan to the public.
If the wrong message or the wrong image gets to the public, it's going to put up so many obstacles and barricades that this won't ever happen.
And how will we defend it?
Yeah,
Because we
need
hadn't
to-
seen it until that day.
Yeah, so
The
We
optional.
have a very vocal
You have the
community.
optional, so in the final version of the scope of work that was approved for this project, we have the option to include,
Yes.
to have additional services if we feel that we need to have
Additional
more public
meetings.
sessions.
Let me just kind of bring everybody back a little bit. When we were first talking about the scope, the town board was very concerned that we weren't allowing the public ample time ahead of time to contribute, to be exposed to it, to understand what was going on. We tried to balance the timeframes in relation to the moratorium as well as the summer season, and understanding at what point we needed more of a refined draft versus when we needed public input. So the town board in the agreement said, you know what, we may need additional public meetings. We don't yet know what this group's meeting structure looks like once we have a base concept and how to talk about that. So there is some flexibility, but there's also concern about the timing, the
But I don't
public's
think, if I'm
availability.
understanding Tom right, I think Tom and I are on the same page, and Greg too, if I'm understanding it correctly, it's not so much the public meeting, we
Right.
don't want anything going out to the public that is not a proper vision, whatever that means, because that ultimately can put up, again, so many obstacles, and then we're going to be fighting against this tide out of the gate, and we can't have that happen. No matter what, people are going to be upset and people are going to be
Right,
happy and have
I
their
would
comment,
see it as
but we need something.
something maybe a week before you
Yes, we need
have
something.
that, so
We
that
need
we
something.
have your nearly finished proposal that we're going to
Can't
go
lose the
public
public.
with, going live with, if you will.
Yeah, we can probably do that.
And do something like that with us. I don't think that's an additional public meeting. I
Right,
think it's a
right.
meeting of this
Yeah.
group.
Right. Exactly.
And, you know, we're gonna have differences here as well, so, but at least people are prepared for that and they're ready for the conversation as well.
Yeah,
It's
and-
not to shortchange the public.
Right.
And it's not, I don't think it's to engage the public a week earlier in addition to the next public meeting. It's really to engage us.
Right.
And make certain that, I mean, for political reasons, economic reasons, you know, we don't have something that.
We could even do it as a go-to meeting a week
Sure.
before, where you guys can show us this,
Yeah.
so you don't have to come up here.
It's like what Bart did with the Mueller report, just let us, let us frame it first.
Yeah,
We just redact the whole thing.
In other words, if you came out with a plan that we
Then we
need
redact the
high rises
plan.
throughout town, we wanna be able to say, no, that's not gonna fly before that goes to the public and we hear like a
Right.
public outcry about it and how could you sitting at this table propose this when you know we don't want
Yeah,
this?
no.
So,
Well, to be
for us to see
no,
it
to
first
be-
is really
yeah.
important.
No, I think we could do that, like, you know, do a go-to meeting or something a week ahead of time. But to be clear, at the first meeting, this shouldn't be a completely surprise to you. Because at the first meeting, we should have already talked about the framework, we should have already kind of honed in on what we think the appropriate approach is. And then the plan that we produce is really kind of a refinement of that input that we've received.
And look, let's not forget that unlike probably some other towns, we're not starting from kind of ground zero because we had a comprehensive plan that we did not that long ago where we had so many public meetings and we did get a lot of public input as to kind of the vision of what the town should look like, things like that. So some of that is gonna be incorporated as well, so we at least kind of have a baseline where we know we wanna go and we'll get you all that information.
So the workshop one is a critical pivot point.
Oh, yeah.
That's the June one, that's June 10th.
Yes.
Sure, Ted, right?
That's
Yes.
it.
8 o'clock, same time.
Bright and early.
Unless,
Coffee.
coffee was supposed to be
Please?
here. It should be coming hopefully, I don't know.
Can I get a
But we leave for the tour.
Believe you me, I need coffee too.
I'll bring Red Bull for everybody.
And unless the committee wants to meet later, I, you know, 8 o'clock.
No, it's.
No, it is on.
Oh, 8 o'clock's good.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do the tour, it's informal, we're just gonna all walk together and walk all of the area and hear what everybody has to say. Hopefully learn about the history, learn about specific things that, opportunities or challenges as we kind of go through. And we might wanna take a 5-minute break before we go.
Yep.
Well, I just wanted to show you where to get coffee. Patty, did you wanna add anything else about what you're gonna be doing, just in the context of this?
Yeah, I'm sitting there thinking about it. One thing I'd like to get, we said we would look at 4 competitive locations. And it would be good to get your input on what you view as competitive locations for the
Mentioned
retail.
Pleasantville and
Right.
Mount Kisco,
Tarrytown,
Tarrytown,
wherever.
wherever.
But I think that's why I wanna get your feedback. I want you to come up with a suggested list and we'll winnow it down. Cause I don't wanna select things that everybody here says, like, heck is that? So.
I don't know
Are you thinking, are you saying competitive as a
Doing a big-
model or competitive as a?
Competitive as a market, yeah, we're looking at the market in terms of the retail, the events, the program.
Right now, so
As
it's all right.
destination.
As a destination, we're not looking at the market of residential, that's gonna be a market unto itself, so we'll look at that separately, but I want your input into, yeah.
Draw people,
Who attracts
draw us
people,
to
you know, what
there.
are the uses there?
Yeah.
We don't wanna repeat what's in some place that's competitive, we wanna be unique. So I'd like your
You
feedback
want
on.
that list now?
Sure, if you wanna throw, if you have ideas, throw it.
What's your radius in
Tarrytown.
terms of competition though?
Pleasantville, Marlboro.
It's what would be, and I haven't defined it yet, would be the drivable market of where people would come from to come here versus there.
Well, what would
And
that likely be?
Yes,
Sure.
Maximum, I would say half an hour drive.
Everybody
That's
loves
probably,
it.
okay,
Yeah.
that's probably.
But are you, can I get clarification, are you, as a competitive market, are where people in the town tend to go? Is that what you're, because what I'm thinking is the town's really far east-west. And I think depending on where you live in the town, depends on where you go. If you live on the east end, I think you might tend to go more Armonk.
Go to Armonk.
And if you live in the west end, you might go Austin and Croton. And if you live in the middle, you might go Pleasantville, Mount Kisco.
But that's for shopping and so on, I think
Right,
we're
but
talking
that's
about
why-
as a destination, right?
A
Well,
destination
I would
of.
say Greenwich, Connecticut.
A place to be rather than a place to, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, just comment on that, like, so there are different market areas, one is, where do the people here shop? But I think you wanna attract more than the people here, you wanna get the people who are going to Armonk, the people who are because you wanna compete with those areas. So just think about.
Have a model.
Well,
Yes.
or complement. So
Or-
in other
well,
words,
that's-
not directly to compete, because I think that's really duplicating what's there.
And we
What
don't
can
wanna
make
do
us
that.
unique so that
Correct.
people can still go to Armonk and yet come here as a destination. So I think it's
Still go to
complementary and so we don't duplicate
Cause
competition.
we're looking to differentiate you, that's
Right.
a better way of saying it.
Because I think competing is just a set number of folks up here in the northern West Shore, and after a while, there's only so many, grocery stores you can go to.
Right, you wanna come to Chappaqua to do this, you wanna go to Armonk to do that, you wanna, so
Right.
where do you?
Why are we going to Chappaqua?
That's what we need to figure out.
And then once
We're
you're
holding the
there,
market.
well, I mean, that's the reality.
Give me some feedback, you can let us know.
Yeah, that's very tough. That's
Any-
very tough to do.
Well,
You wanna think about it, you can think about
I
it.
said Pleasantville and Ormo.
Yeah, so far I heard Armonk, Pleasantville, Tarrytown,
I think
Pomona,
Greenwich is-
Boston.
Greenwich, Connecticut.
Yeah, and that's a much bigger
That's
place.
Yeah, but it's got a it's walkable, people, it's always packed.
I think what's helpful in making this list is why do people go to that place as opposed to going to
Right, right.
That's right.
The Tarrytown is because of the music hall and the
Exactly.
restaurants right
And
there.
that's what we want to, that's exactly what.
Pleasantville is
Jacob
because of
Burns.
Jacob Burns, I mean,
Right.
like,
So you want Tarrytown?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's actually
It's
vibrant and they
yes.
have no parking.
That's right, and they have a train station,
And they
Yep.
which is I think
And a
Down
hill.
the river, and a big hill.
And a big
Yes.
hill.
And it's interesting because the road that goes down to the river is doing better than Route 9, which is on top of the hill.
Route
And
9.
Route 9's a one-sided retail street
right,
for traffic.
we actually work there, so I'm curious to go back, because you're saying the Route 9 wasn't very good when we were there, so that'll be
And it's
interesting to
not-
see.
help them solve their nighttime parking problem when
Yeah.
they're there, because it's a bear park to go to, that's a digression,
Well, I
sorry,
don't wanna-
but that's
I'm
one
out
of
of
the
there.
things we need to bring up too.
So we got
Somebody wants
Tarrytown, Armonk, Pleasantville, and Greenwich. My only comment about Greenwich, and we should look there to see what's so attractive about it, but it's much bigger.
Yeah, much bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be like looking at White Plains.
Yeah.
Why do we say, why is Katono on the list?
A lot of people like to go to Katona.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's very attractive.
Yes.
It is what?
It is.
It's not that much there.
Shopping,
It's not that much, but
It's
it's
just a little
You
strip.
can take the train there, you can walk around the town.
yeah, little shops, we go in,
I used to
eat
take my
lunch.
kids
I take my
there.
kids up there, yeah, my little
Yeah.
guy, we go up to eat lunch and come back on the train.
Yeah,
We
you got a
literally
little,
hop the train,
they got
go
a
and come
little
back.
And
store,
that's
they got
a
a
good
diner, they
thing,
got the
because part
library,
of the
it's all
parking
local.
issue, especially on the weekends as you were all talking, it sort of struck me that why not get people to come on a train here?
Yeah.
Right?
Well-
Why do you have to drive?
Right, you get off the train and you go to
I
the
used to
market
take my
or the
kids to
restaurant.
Katona and it was
Yeah,
like
a
an
lot of
adventure
young
to take the
kids go to
train.
Katona.
And we'd buy our tickets and go on the train
Yep.
and then get off and go to the little bookstore and go to the little
Yep.
diner and go to the library. It's like a thing.
I think you have to put Mount Kisco in though, because it's
Yeah, you
northern-
do.
northern
In Mount
Western
Kisco,
Hub.
yeah, you have to, and, cause there's different areas of Mount Kisco, but if you think about the village area of Mount Kisco, and they're going through their own re-identification at this point too, but I think it's important to take a look at it.
But not for the look of it.
No, but
For
not
place that
the
people-
physical look of it, but go and see and.
I think
Is
before you
there-
look at Greenwich, I'd look at Richfield before Greenwich.
Richfield is,
Yes.
yeah, excellent. I would also, just for the look of it, I'd
Yeah,
put
right.
Bedford on the
Very
list
successful.
with their town green.
Okay, now we have a lot.
Bedford's like so, how about Rye?
So let's vote.
That-
Rye, right, that's right.
Right,
All right.
it's very successful.
I go to Bedford.
Similar.
For what?
Yes.
For what?
Yeah, right.
But it's successful, it's
Restaurants
become
there.
successful?
Very
Yeah.
successful.
Okay, so can we do a vote? All right.
Folks, listen up, please.
This is what we have right now. We have Bedford.
Yeah.
Are we
No.
Sorry,
No.
Tom, there's like 3 stores there.
I never
What?
go there.
Very.
3 stores, okay, are we, is the majority, I see a lot of
How about Rye?
Yeah.
We have Rye on the list, we'll get through. So, because we have to winnow it down,
Alright,
so
guys,
I'm seeing a
listen.
lot of on Bedford. We can always add it back if we end up with nothing, because there are too many ands. Ridgefield,
What was it?
I say yes.
I say
How many
yes.
votes do you have?
But
We
it's-
need a process to do this.
Yeah, I was gonna
How many
say-
votes do you have?
That's always like towns we're competing with, them, not competing, but you know, like.
Well, Ridgefield, I think, is a good model because of what they did, and that they decided that they were going to put a lot of performing arts in.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
sort of like Pleasantville did Jacob Burns, and
So I guess
Tarrytown is music
They've
hall.
got an
But there's two
Yeah.
questions, right? One is, what towns have started off in a difficult situation and worked their way forward, like a Rye or Mamaroneck, versus what towns we compete with?
Yes, and
It's
that's
very
really
different,
good,
right?
that's
Because a
the
lot of people
key.
don't travel all the
Right.
way to, Greenwich to do something, to go
That's
have
right.
lunch, they'll eat lunch around here.
Yes.
We don't compete that way.
Right, right.
Performing arts we do around here. May not go to Bedford, I never go to Bedford unless I'm maybe going to the theater or I have a destination I need to go to, but who competes with us locally versus what towns turned it around and how they do it. Like Rye's very chopped up like we are, right? It's got streets running every which way and parking lots behind, and all individual owners, but doing really well. Mamaroneck's big long street, but they have a harbor. But they've turned
Right,
it
which
around,
is different.
and they've
Okay.
thrown away the parking thing.
So I think the competition part
There's
is.
two lists, I think.
We wanted to differentiate ourselves, but where would people go from this area to get different types of entertainment, events, retail? We're adding another?
That's like
The
a
western
city.
part of town goes there.
Okay.
It's great.
There's great entertainment there.
Yeah, so they don't come
You have
here,
something
where they
going on.
go, and that's what we wanna look at, and why they're going there and how we can differentiate ourselves.
Kids go
So let's just, so we have now Pleasantville. Do people from here go to Pleasantville?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of
okay.
nice new restaurants.
Okay, that was
Yeah.
good. Ridgefield, would anyone from here go to Ridgefield? In this area?
Not really.
No.
No.
That would be a special trip every once in a while, but it's,
Yeah,
it's
it's
a
not
long
Kisco.
drive.
Okay.
It is.
Armonk,
Yeah,
yes,
definitely.
Tarrytown,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
yes, okay. Katona,
No.
Yes.
Yes. I think a lot of people
I
do.
hear a one, no, I'm just gonna give it a squiggle because we have to have four. Mount Kisco.
Yes.
Yes.
Definitely.
Not Kisco, yeah.
It's gotta be.
That's a very functional place.
Okay, we have four, I'm going to Rye, actually, Rye? No, okay, so we have to eliminate, we have Pleasantville, Armonk, Tarrytown, Katona, and Mount Kisco.
Yeah. Those
What about
are, and
Irvington?
again, those are the
No, we're not adding it.
those are the,
Sorry, I have to be the teacher here.
well, the-
You always solve our process.
Places that compete,
yeah, with here.
the shopping
Yes,
dollar
where
here.
People from
Yes,
The
where
dollars here.
people go,
Those are
and
good,
it
that's a
goes,
good list, I
It's
think you have a
good
good list.
we need
competitors,
to
but
get
it's
rid of
not.
one,
It may
unless
not
you
be,
want
it
to
may not
add
be an
model.
example of
What's
where,
the list?
what you're
We have
accomplished.
Pleasantville, Armonk, Tarrytown, Katona, and Mount Kisco.
Take Mount Kisco.
So those are the places that people go
It's too
to
big.
from here,
But it's
Yeah,
not, it
not
may not be a
necessarily the
comp.
places we wanna model ourselves.
Right,
Yeah,
it's not-
right,
Yeah,
no,
that's
we
what
need
you
to
said.
say, where are they
Sometimes it's
going?
wanna confirm
What can we
What's
have
there?
that they don't
But it's
have?
Tarrytown.
So
I
can I
Yeah,
say
and I
something,
think that's
let me
good.
let me redefine the roles here, okay? Eric is going to give you what we're gonna look like,
Right.
okay?
Yeah.
Patty's gonna give us what the market is and what people are gonna
Got
stay
it,
here
I just
for.
wanted to confirm.
I just, I really
think
want
that's
you
the
to
list.
understand that, so she's asking
No.
for her market
When we
analysis.
meant model, we meant model financially.
Yeah, model,
Like square footage, cost per
Correct.
square footage,
Correct.
building
Where are
costs.
the
Yes.
dollars
Not
going?
Not even that,
That
for
we
this
want to
piece,
stay
that's
consistent.
correct.
correct.
So
then I think you take Katona off,
Because I don't think the dollars are going to Katona, it's the
Right.
dollars are going to Tarrytown.
Yeah, well, dollar.
I mean, honestly, if people really need something, they're also going to White Plains.
And for
Like a lot of people are going to the
That's a
mall and a
regional
lot of
shopping,
people-
Yeah, that's different.
right, you're not
Yeah.
gonna
We're
duplicate
not
that.
gonna put them
No,
all
no,
in the
no,
Westchester.
We're not
But
capable.
I understand what you're saying, it's more, and we'll take that into account when we look at where people are shopping, but this is more to understand how we can differentiate ourselves, not just
Well, I
what
think
retail.
Tarrytown would take over for Katona because
Yeah.
Katona is just a little,
Katona's what we'd like to be maybe, but Tarrytown is where people are actually going today, is my thought.
So Tarrytown, we're taking Mount Kisco or Katona off?
Katona.
Katona.
Katona, so we got Pleasantville, Armonk, Tarrytown, and Mount Kisco. Agreed?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay, all right, thank you.
let's call it a day, that's good, we got it.
But can we put on this as a list, the
happy
models, right? Like,
Sure, and that's, I think, a model for what you wanna look
think
like.
No, I don't mean model look, I mean
Okay.
model space,
Strategy.
square footage, cost per square foot, financially, size of businesses, because we have to figure out what we're gonna be. Once you figure out what we're gonna be, then we have to figure out what size, what footprint do we need to support those businesses coming in. Because we have a lot of really little space, right, very difficult parking, so we may say, great, we're gonna go compete with Armonk Square. We can't, we don't have that space. That's big space, right? How are we gonna do that?
So then what do you
We'll
think
be
about
looking-
Scarsdale?
We have to, well, we
Rye?
have to look
So
at.
we'll be looking at the market, right? What's a
Yeah.
market for
Right.
retail? What's a market for
Right.
residential? And what could you support here? And that translates into the physical format of what you need to have in order to drive
And costs
retail,
associated
to
with
drive,
it,
right. Do you wanna have cultural or entertainment? Do you have a lot of events, do you wanna have more of that? Is there a place to do that would become more of a regular location for holding events?
Well,
So
we
things-
have, just so you know, I don't know if you know, up at Chappaqua Crossing, we have a Chappaqua Performing Arts Center that we're kind of developing, and we'd like to develop into something great. Kind of what we wanna do though is figure out how to incorporate that with downtown Chappaqua, because they're two kind of different business areas, and we want people to be able to come to our downtown Chappaqua, which is our Hamlet, as opposed to, you know, staying in Chappaqua Crossing, which has, you know, a Whole Foods and a gym, and it will have townhomes and the Performing Arts Center. So that's already there.
That
So
could be,
this-
just to, I mean, there has been some concern, very public concern, that that's going to be competition for.
Right.
Yeah, that's definitely.
We need to
Yeah,
complement.
we will go up there separate and apart from this working group, so you can at least see what the town has been, you know, has been, you know, looking at how that corporate office park was transformed. There's certain measures that the town had put into, the decision makers had put into place to make sure there were connections between that site, that location, and the Chappaqua Hamlet. You know, there is a shuttle that runs back and forth. You know, there's the Performing Arts Center, which was given to the town to try and create a destination up there, but also create a connection with Chappaqua.
Well, not for nothing, I mean, if you're looking at where our downtown dollars are going, I mean, Chappaqua Crossing, it's too soon to really do an analysis of it on the same level, but it's something you have to consider.
We do.
But we did put restrictions in there for uses of the type of store so that it wouldn't necessarily compete with the downtown. Like, there's a big supermarket there, we couldn't fit that down here. So that's there, we limited certain stores so that.
Basically, just real quick, as far as the uses, there's no service industries up there, so no dry cleaners, no
Yeah.
pharmacies,
Nail
no
salons.
nail salons, no
Real
hair
estate
salons,
offices.
banks. And you know, to what Randy was saying too, part of the reason is because that we have that here. And people, by the way, complain, we have so many nail salons, so many hair salons, but the reality is, A, they're staying in business, and B, the footprints are conducive for those type of
Right.
businesses.
So you're
we
saying
can't
none
do
of
that.
that is
We said none of that in Chappaqua Crossing.
Okay, so it's mostly big box.
Well, it's actually only
Like
two
Whole
big
Foods?
box stores allowed, Whole Foods and Lifetime Fitness,
It's
but
120,000 square feet.
And that's
of
80 right there.
commercial
But 80's
retail.
between
Retail.
two tenants.
Okay.
But there's
So
gonna
we'll
be-
go up and look at that, I don't want.
it's gonna be Verizon,
Yeah,
I'll tell you right now,
it's
it's gonna be a Verizon, there's gonna be a Fidelity, there's gonna be a wellness center,
Could be
there's a
90
jewelry
townhomes.
store, Rocks,
Jewelry store.
there's Rocks, there's gonna be two restaurants coming, there's gonna be a Starbucks coming with the drive-through.
There's a pet
What's
store.
a pet store
Pet-
too,
Pet
right?
Value's
Pet
up there.
store.
That's kind of it.
I mean, this
Might
is
be
the
a few
biggest
little-
competitor for where we're downtown. I think.
Oh, it sounds like it is.
I don't know, I mean, I will
It could
tell
be
you, the
different.
stores are complaining already that there's no foot traffic up there. I mean, because really, a lot of people do go there to go to the gym or to go to Whole Foods, and then they
Drive
leave.
in and leave, right.
Yeah.
There's also a
talk to
64
Felix,
unit
it's his
apartment
development.
building there, there's 500,000 square feet of office use, and there will be 91 townhomes. So
Yeah.
while there
It's
is
not
no
fully
current
developed.
foot traffic up there, there will be
Yeah.
foot traffic up there.
Right.
But we have a train.
We do have that.
500,000 square feet.
There's, I mean, as far as the foot
About
traffic, part of the problem is the whole
250,000
line of retail is vacant except for the two stores at the very end. And it's not rented yet. So there is no foot traffic on that area.
And you
We're
have
hoping
the
one
train.
day there will be. We have the
They
train.
We
don't.
have the train, they don't, there is a shuttle. The train moves
Okay.
people back and forth.
But we have the train, we also have, 1,400 cars that park here every day, but the reality is that people get in the car and then they drive home.
Right.
So, it wouldn't be the worst thing to figure out how to get these people to stay here at night.
Right.
There is also potential for a walkable path that actually connects there to downtown Chappaqua. There's actually, instead of having to do a sidewalk along 117, there's a potential for a path that can connect them.
Unfortunately, most people who commute, once they get to their car, unless they're passing something on the way to their car, they're not gonna get off the train unless there's something
No,
very
but on the
compelling.
weekends, people would, in terms of
Totally.
walkability and getting exercise, you may say, let's go to walk to the gym, and then we come back and walk here and
Absolutely.
go to the
Weekends,
restaurants.
Yep,
Going to believe in you.
As close as they can.
okay, that's helpful, thank you.
Okay, so coffee's being made. We could take a break
For a road trip.
and then go for a walk.
Yeah.